Hi again, I am Chris Colley, and thanks for joining me on my multiple myeloma journey. As of the time of this recording, it is day 29 of treatment and day 18 of chemotherapy. I've now had 3 doses of Daracibor-D. This has been a strange weekend. It's kind of hard to describe what I was expecting with side effects. I've been mostly having fever on chemotherapy days, but I had nothing on Friday. No side effects whatsoever. Woke up on Saturday, no side effects whatsoever. And then after I got out of dialysis, probably a few hours after dialysis was over, I started getting kind of a stomach ache. I wouldn't say I was overly nauseated. All I had was a stomach ache. And that stomach ache is pretty much held through most of this weekend. I have a fullness of belly right now, where it feels like I'm full, even though I've barely eaten anything this weekend. I didn't have much appetite this weekend. But last night, I don't know, probably around 11 o'clock, something like that, I decided to take an anti-nausea pill. And right after I took it, I started having the heavy dry heaves like the vomiting spell. But nothing was in my stomach. Nothing was going to come up. At the very end, there was maybe a slight amount of liquid in my throat, but that was nothing. It just went away. And I ended up going back to sleep. For the most part, this whole weekend, there have been no discernible side effects other than the fact that I have a fullness in the belly and my stomach is kind of hurt. My right kidney is very sore today. It's sensitive to the touch in the back. I don't know how much of that is contributing to the stomach and the fullness feeling, but that's the only thing I'm really feeling right now. Today's video is called Tornado Without a Basement. The reason I'm calling it that is because you sometimes get a little bit of warning right before a tornado. You have no idea where it's going to strike until the very end, and you have no idea how devastating it's going to be once it hits. And I think that's a good description of me entering the emergency room at Centennial Hills Hospital on May 8th at around 8 p.m. I had no idea what to expect going in there. Was it going to be a normal ER experience where you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting? Or was somebody going to take me in immediately? Were they really waiting for me? When Carrie and I entered the emergency room, there were maybe 50 people in there, and they were staffed up. I go to the window, hand him my paperwork. He tells me to go take a seat and that somebody would be with me shortly. Within 5 minutes, somebody calls me back. They take my blood pressure, ask me a bunch of questions. My blood pressure is again 191 over something. They're like, "You see that?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I saw 200 at the quick care." So I was very aware that my blood pressure was a big problem. So after they finish that, they send me back out to the lobby. And I sit down for another 5 minutes. And somebody comes back and gets me. And they put an IV lead in my arm, take blood work. Once I have the IV lead, that just means that I'm ready to go. Any fluids they want to put in, they can just go ahead and put it in. After the IV lead is in, he sends me back to the lobby. About 5 minutes later, I'm asked to go into the office of Dr. Jackman, who talks to me about my symptoms, wondering what's going on, not really sure what is going on. And he tells me he's going to go put me on fluids because I haven't eaten in so long. I told him I was eating about 200 calories a day at that point, max, if that. He sends me back to the lobby, and a few minutes later, somebody comes out and takes me back to put in fluids. It's a room full of comfortable chairs. There are 3 on each row. And I'm facing the wall where there are 3 people pointing my direction as well. They're all getting fluids of some sort. They're all having some kind of testing or diagnostic done. And they put sodium bicarbonate into my IV just to give me some fluid. I was asked if I was nauseated and I could have Zofran, if so. And I said, I think I'm okay for now. So I sat there getting fluids for about an hour and 10 minutes. And then they come out, and I am a bit nauseated again and ask for the Zofran, and they inject it into my IV. After the fluids are done, I'm told that I need to get a chest scan. So they take me and give me a chest scan. They bring me back. The nurse says to me, they're probably not going to keep you. They're going to set you up for a discharge. Go ahead and head out to the lobby, and somebody will tell you what to do next. By this time, it's probably about 9:45 p.m. So I go back out to the lobby. Kara and I are talking about what I went through. And about 10 minutes later, a woman comes out from the back and says, can you come follow me? I said, okay. And as I'm walking toward her, she says, do you need a wheelchair? And I was like, no, I don't need a wheelchair. I'm walking fine. I walk back with her, and she puts me in one of the emergency room bays, which are in this hallway. There's just a bed in there at that point. A very uncomfortable bed. I'm starting to feel it in my back at this point. I still have no idea what's going on, but I'm starting to feel it. I'm getting tired. And she just tells me to sit there and that the doctor will be in to see me shortly. Dr. Jackman, the same guy. About 10 minutes later, right about 10 o'clock, Dr. Jackman comes in with his supervisor, and he says, I have some sobering news for you. You're in nearly complete renal failure. He begins talking about something called creatinine, which is just a nothing product. It's a waste product. It means nothing to your body, but it is a red flag that says your kidneys are not functioning, because it cannot get rid of it if your kidneys are not functioning. It's a nothing product. The normal creatinine that is in a person's system is 1. My creatinine at the emergency room was 22. And this was what explained that dirt taste in my mouth. This is also what explained my vomiting. Because the way I describe it is that my vomiting was like a bicycle pump, that you keep pushing the pump down. And when my creatinine would hit 22, whatever was in my stomach or not in my stomach would eject. So anytime I was near 22 in creatinine, that meant I was going to throw up. This also explained the dirt taste in my mouth. My kidneys weren't functioning, so waste was coming back up. It wasn't staying down, and that made my mouth taste like dirt. But when he came in and he said that I was in renal failure, I'm like, oh, now it all makes sense. That didn't surprise me at all, except for one thing. I've been being totally normal. There had never been a loss of urine function. I never had anything strange in my urine. There was no flags on my urine that there was anything going on with my kidneys. Everything was normal with my urine from a layperson standpoint. When he told me about renal failure, he told me I've been officially admitted to the ICU with AKI, acute kidney injury. One of the things they said was that my blood work didn't really make a lot of sense. Normally, when people show up with my condition at the ER, their potassium levels are through the roof. Mine were critically low. They said my electrolytes were basically in balance, which was surprising. It wasn't surprising to me because I've been drinking a lot of Powerade Zero. But on that last day before I went into the hospital, I was having trouble keeping that down and switched back to water. And I was worried that I was causing problems with the Powerade Zero. And they told me that it was actually good that I'd been drinking the Powerade Zero. So that may have saved my life. Now, I have no idea how close I was to death going into the ER, but I would guess it was probably within 48 hours if I hadn't gone in. Because my kidneys were being murdered at that point, and I didn't even know it because my pee was fine. I didn't feel any pain in my kidneys. I just had no idea what was going on. So he told me that I had been admitted to the ICU, but that I probably wasn't going to be able to get a bed for a while. But they had everything they needed to do there. About every 15 minutes or so, somebody would come in, take blood work, do an IV. No idea what was actually being done to me at that point. Kara was sitting in the bay with me. I remember a nurse comes in and wants me to sign an electronic thing. And I was like, well, can I read whatever you're having me sign there? Oh, yes, let me go print that out. So she prints it out. She comes back. It's like 20 pages of documents about you're going to make sure you pay us. The beginning of my insurance fund, if you want to call it. So I read over all the documentation over the next 30 or 40 minutes, and I wait for her to come back so that I can sign it. I'm ready to sign. She never comes back to get me to sign it. I'm pretty sure it's the same paperwork I signed at the UMC Quick Care, so it was unnecessary paperwork. Maybe. Otherwise, I just didn't sign any paperwork when I went into the hospital. They come in, they ask me, they say, if you have an event where your heart stops, do you want us to do everything necessary to save you? I said, sure, fine, whatever. But for the most part, there was just nothing, no information, just getting fluids all night. Started me on the IVs, but not much information. Probably around 4:30, I finally was sleepy enough to fall asleep in this really uncomfortable bed. I fall asleep, and the next thing I know, somebody's coming up on me and saying, you've got your ICU room. I'm like, okay. So they wheel me up to the ICU and move me to a bed. It's more comfortable, but still uncomfortable in its own way. And that begins my trip to ICU, where I had no idea what to expect. I'm going to tell you, being in the ICU probably is a lot like being in prison. You have guards around the clock. You have people checking on you every 15 minutes. If an alarm on your machine goes off, somebody comes in. You are not going to get much sleep, and I did not get much sleep at all in the ICU because they were constantly taking blood work. But I say it's probably a little bit like prison because you have a big old toilet right in the middle of the floor. There's no mirror because nobody wants to see what they look like when they're inside the ICU. But the door's open at all times, and you have a big old toilet right in the middle of the floor. No shower. And you're tethered up to your machines, so you can't do anything without somebody coming in and helping you. It's one of those 0 out of 5 stars experiences that I would avoid if you can. So that first night, they're just trying to stabilize my blood because my blood is messed up. I've been admitted to the ICU because my blood is being poisoned, AKI. That's a really bad way to be admitted to the ER. And I was admitted to the ER in one of the worst possible ways with it. Something like 4% of people who come in with AKI come in like I did, where my kidneys were basically completely shut down. So I don't remember that much about the ICU after I got down there. I probably got about an hour of sleep afterwards. And then the kidney doctors come in. And one of the things I'll go ahead and say now is that I'm going to be talking about doctors. I'm going to be talking about nurses, good and bad. There may be some unflattering stuff that's said about some people. There was at least one doctor that I didn't like. I did not like him at all. I wish I'd never met him, but I did. And his decisions ultimately led me onto the timeline to Dr. Henry Iggett, so I had to actually thank him. But he made my stay worse. He put my spirit into a worse spirit. And I'm going to call stuff out like that when it happens. Just like I'm going to call out when something really good happens. And I'll talk about him more in the next video. But my first doctor that I met was a kidney doctor named Dr. Boulder. He comes in because I'd also had a stomach scan that night before, and the stomach scan was basically normal. I had mild acute diverticulitis. but otherwise my scan was normal. Dr. Boulder comes in and he says, your kidneys look normal. Everything looks normal on your scans. There's nothing that we can see. You have a little bit of protein in your urine. There's no blood in your urine. You're still peeing, so we don't need to give you a catheter. He said he was scheduling an ultrasound for my kidneys to see if there was anything additional they could tell from that. He told me he did not think I would need to be on dialysis, and he thought that whatever was going on with me was reversible. And that was that. He said I would see him the next day. The rest of my day in the ICU was just getting fluids, blood work, and no sleep. None. But I felt pretty much fine. CN in California called me. He was like, I don't want to disturb you. I don't want to take up your time. I'm like, man, I'm sitting here in the ICU doing nothing. I'm wanting to have calls after calls after calls. I just want to pass the time. I talked to my sister a lot. I talked to CN. And I'm sure I talked to others, but I can't remember who at that time. Not in the ICU, I don't remember. But I felt mostly fine when I was in the ICU. So that morning, a woman comes in. She gives me the ultrasound. Gets in there, really messing with my body. It's a pretty intense experience while she's doing it. And I wait for the results. Next morning, Friday morning, Dr. Boulder comes in and says my ultrasound looks normal. Nothing alarming. And that now they're going to have to give me a kidney biopsy to try to figure out what's going on with me. They have no idea what's going on with me. During that meeting, he said that my numbers for why I was admitted in the ICU were fine now, and that I could be downgraded to get a regular room. He again told me that he did not think I needed dialysis and that he thought everything was reversible. I asked how long it would take to get a room, and they had no idea. It was a Friday. Now, on Thursday night, when I went to go pee, I got up and noticed I started leaking blood on the floor from one of my IVs. And I cannot remember the nurse's name. He was a really awesome, friendly, gentle nurse. And I remember when it happened, I called him. And he came in and he ripped the thing off, the IV lead, and it was very painful. But he got the bleeding stopped and he just got rid of that IV. It was a little bit scary, seeing myself drip out a little bit there. But he was there. It was no problem. And he was really good at his job. My main ICU nurse during the day, I can't remember for sure what his name is, but I feel like it was Ray. He was awesome. He was always there. He made me feel comfortable, really helped get me through the ICU part of it. And on that Friday night, as I'm still waiting for my room, it is 7:30 p.m. I was downgraded from the ICU, ready to move to a room at 10 a.m. on Friday morning, and I still didn't have a room. It's 7:30. And I was waiting to call Kara to have her come be with me once I got to the room. But I guess she got impatient. And she showed up in the ICU about 5 minutes before a really bad event happened. A mistake. And if she hadn't been there, it's very likely I would have bled out because of this mistake, because of how I was set up in the room. But what happened was about 7:15 p.m. on Friday night, my ICU nurse had changed out my IV of some sort. And I feel a wet feeling on my hand, and I can see that the IV lead is leaking. So I bring it up, and he comes in, and he goes, okay, that's weird. Let me unhook it and put it back in. He puts it back in, still leaking. And it's leaking for a thing. He's like, wow, this is defective. He's like, oh, whatever, you're about to leave. So let me just go ahead and take out this IV lead. It's no big deal. And he forgets that I'm on heparin. And he didn't hold down the pressure after he removed the IV lead long enough. Kara had shown up about 5 minutes before this, and she was laying in my ICU bed. I was sitting in a chair. I didn't have my call button, and Kara had shown up 5 minutes sooner as he's wrapping up, taking out this IV lead. He walks out of the room. His back is just out the door, and I look down at my Band-Aid, and it is engorged with blood, and I don't have my call button. He's just walked out of the room. I don't have a lot of strength to yell, and I said to Kara, "Run and grab him now." She grabs him. He comes back in, and I say, "I'm about to start bleeding." And right as he gets to me, a waterfall of blood comes out from underneath this bandage. And he grabs my wrist in a vice. Like I thought he was breaking my arm. Applying as much pressure as he possibly can. 5 minutes, still bleeding. After he pulls the pressure. 10 minutes, still bleeding. After he pulls the pressure. 15 minutes, still bleeding. After he pulls the pressure. At the 20-minute mark, he finally got the bleed stopped. And it's just a tiny hole. But that thing would have leaked like a sieve. Other than some bruising from what he did, there was no indication that that had even been an incident a few days later. This happened right as I was about to go down to my regular room. The event of him fixing it was probably around maybe 7:50. I think they came to get me around 8:30 to go to my room. But this was a point where I started getting nervous. There have been little bitty mistakes, little bitty bad things that have been happening to me throughout my time in the ICU that made me wonder if I was going to get got by a mistake. And that was a big one. And if Kara hadn't been there, I would have probably bled out. I probably would have died. Maybe an alarm with the heart monitor that I had on would have gone off once I started bleeding bad, but that would have been a bad scene. So I really am grateful Kara showed up at the exact moment as she did. Because if she didn't, who knows what would have happened. Because I was not properly prepared for a moment like that. But that's pretty much my stay in the ICU, and I called this a tornado without a basement. Because that tornado ripped right through me. I had no basement. I had an idea that something was wrong. But when that tornado came down, I was not prepared for what I was about to get. In my next video, I'm going to talk about my regular hospital stay, which was extraordinarily unpleasant. Thanks for joining me on my multiple myeloma journey. I'll see you again soon.